Okay.
Okay, here we go.
That's like a bite. It's all good.
Daytimers failed.
Yeah, we can't allow Alex to be in the live stream.
Nope.
It's a fantastic way to make sure we don't have a live stream.
You know, we haven't tested that for a while. Maybe YouTube fixed it. You think that's possible?
I think they actually enhanced the ugly filter.
That's
Good,
me.
good old.
Yeah.
Which doesn't explain me whatsoever.
Oh, I think your thumbnails are funny.
Yeah.
Wait for a
It just takes a random clip, and it's usually when I have my mouth open.
Wait for you to go.
Yeah.
I'm good till Thursday.
What book are we in now?
Thursday,
Mark one.
Friday, and
Oh
Saturday.
yeah, Mark.
Everything is Sunday. Having Colton. I'll be glad when he gets a little bit bigger where I can bring him with. How old is he now? 2.5.
Yep, I just finished
I
Mark
just- I
2
just
weeks
can't
ago. So
Love those little kids.
I'm on 5
I
steps
don't know
salvation.
how people, you know, like
Together at the door. And
little Abby, you know. I don't know that.
It's gonna be too long November or something.
Coming close.
Mommy's is 25th.
Oh, this is 25th.
I think Helen's the 25th. Week later.
Mm-hmm.
Colton's is 23rd of March, he'll be 3. Just getting so small. So how old was Abby?
I'm out
Before
for
I
it.
started bringing her, because she was still little. Yeah. Maya's probably around 3 years old, yeah.
About that time when she,
Oh,
leaving when she left.
oh,
you
Linda,
know.
it was so funny. We were
Yeah.
at church in the other side at FLC. She wouldn't be still, just would not. So I thought,
She wanted to go
I
home.
don't wanna spank you, but you're gonna get up pretty soon. Well, she kept it up and I thought, well, just go home.
She was mad
I
at
got
me
it.
for a long time because I put the ball away.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I picked her up and we're going down the side and she threw up, bye.
Oh, boy, I won.
It was so cute. Oh,
That's too good.
Yeah.
and everybody else but grandma.
Right.
Mean old grandma.
Mean old grandma.
Yeah, that's how all
That's
kids
why
are.
she said, I said to her the other night, I talked to her on Sundays now. And I said, well, honey, it sounds like things are going pretty good for you right now. Seems like Jewel is really good. And she said, yes, she is. But Grandma, don't forget, I want to live with you.
Oh, that's nice.
Don't forget.
Like
Yeah.
that's likely.
Is she 8?
She just
That's what I
turned
thought.
8.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
29th.
That's really cool. She's one smart girl.
Our son, when he was little, you couldn't get him to be quiet in church. Of course, there was no place for him to go. You know, they didn't have it. And so, more than once, I had my limit. So I pick him up, I take him outside, I paddle his bottom. He's fine. We go up the stairs to come in from the outside. The minute I got inside that door, he'd start crying and screaming and crying and screaming.
Yes.
He cried when he come back in. He always has had a mind of his own, kind of like his mom and daddy.
I wanted to make a comment about
Oh, come on, Paul. Get the one-liner out.
Oh, yeah.
For both of them.
It's not
No,
daytimers
God,
without a Paul
God.
one-liner.
That means he's saving it for something.
Oh, okay.
It's
All
coming
right.
still.
Yeah, it's still coming. All right. Well, we're in Mark chapter 1. We are at verse 36, even though we're going to read verse 35 again, so we have the story all together. I want to say hello to everybody on the camera.
Hi,
Welcome.
everybody.
Hi there.
I'm in Daytimers jail.
Say, I
Yep.
talked to Velda and she, that one day, they didn't get anything, she said.
It says we're live, so I don't know.
No, it was a week or so ago.
Okay. Well, if she tells you that again, have her call me and I can help them.
See if there's something.
Yeah.
Was
Yeah.
that the
Okay.
day you showed up a little later? Did we get it set up?
I don't know. Sorry.
She might have been, and then she wouldn't have picked up anything, so she thought something was wrong.
Yeah, no, we're alive.
I'll call her, see if she got us today.
Okay, all right. Yeah, she can always call me and I can help them out.
All right.
In fact, I repurchased my old software because enough people call me and it's like I'm just going to be able to log in and fix it. It's just easier that way. All righty. Well, we're in Mark chapter 1. If somebody would read verses 35 through 37. Anybody?
Now in the morning, having risen a long while before daylight, he went out and departed to a solitary place, and there he prayed. And Simon and those who were with him searched for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is looking for you."
Okay. Thank you, Shirley. Now, just give you a 15-second review. Jesus had quite the day before, casting out demons, healing people, preaching. Do you remember there was a demon that cried out and said, "What do we have to do with you, Jesus of Nazareth? You come to destroy us. I know who you are, the Holy One of God." So Satan's unleashing everything. Everybody's being needy. The disciples are clueless. And so Jesus needs a little time to himself, a little bit of a break. And of course, where does he go? He goes to a lonely place early in the morning, and he prays there. Now, I'm not a morning person. Who here is? Morning.
He used to be, not anymore.
Not anymore?
He saw the
You're a morning
he saw the
person.
light. That's
Are you a morning? No, I'm not either.
no.
I'm not either. Okay, so that's kind of surprising to me. We're half and half. Now, most groups, I find there's more morning people than night people. But we're a little half and half here. So I think we can say Jesus is probably a bit of a morning person, because if he wants to get up early to be alone and to have time to pray, then there has to be some part of him that is a morning person. And even if you're not, there is something peaceful about getting up before everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there is. And Kara tells me that because she's always the first one up at 3:30 in the morning. I have no idea how she does that. Even though sometimes she wakes me up and then I'm awake. And yeah, I can rarely go back to sleep, especially if the dogs decide I need to be awake. And but it is nice because if you're up before everybody else, then it's quiet.
That's a good time to do Bible study.
Yeah, Bible studying. It's a good time to pray. It's a good time to organize your day, and whatever. Now, for me, the same thing can be true late at night because I'm usually the last one to go to bed. Everybody else, all my kids, true story, I have 4 children, and all of them have always went to bed when they needed to. I've never had to fight them. That blows me away. It's kind of a miracle. And even Luke goes to bed on his own. They all just go to bed. I'm the only kid that can't go to bed on time. And so anytime about 10 o'clock or after, I'm on my own. And it can be an equally good time to be alone and to pray and to relax. And I find I get some of my best studying and writing done late at night. But I have learned to not trust my first draft if I write it late at night.
Yeah.
I'd better go back and edit it before I publish it if I write it late at night. But
There's great ideas, but it doesn't always come out.
it doesn't always come out right. Yeah, I've had some interesting conversations. For example, if you leave out the word "not" in certain sentences, it can really be bad.
It kind of changes it a little.
It really can, yeah. So, in fact, something I teach the preacher boys is you always want to write your sermon in advance so you've got time to sleep on it. You've got to give your time for your brain to reset and to rethink through it. Because if you just try to do it all in one day, you're going to come out with something pretty sloppy. No matter how much time you have in that day, you need time for your brain to reset, relax, reread. The sermon I preached Sunday, I've been working on for several weeks because regardless if I succeeded or not, I was really trying to preach something that would reach both young and old on purpose. I mean, I don't like it as much as anyone else, but as we bury more of our older friends, the young people need to get to know them before that happens, and also to be able to follow their example, while that happens. And I think in older times, it was more natural for older and younger people to spend time together, and that's not so true anymore. So if we don't make intentional efforts, it's not going to happen. We don't put some effort into it. And so,
Yeah, that's right. I see that in my family because when I was young, it was nothing I'd rather do than go and spend time at my grandmother's.
Mhm.
And I did a lot of that on weekends and Bible school time. I would go and spend those 2 weeks there.
Yep.
But, like Katie's kids, Adam and Ethan and Caitlin and the little one. The little one, now she would live at grandma's house because she thinks I have a beautiful house. She says, beautiful. So cute. But, the other kids, but now the last couple of weeks, Caitlin has come and sat with me at church.
Cool. Good.
Yeah, and a couple of her friends, they sit there too, Ethan, he must have ants in his pants on Sunday mornings because some mornings he comes and sits with me for a while. Then he gets up and he goes back. And he might come back again. But
it's nice having the
you
group of
don't-
teenagers opening doors for us.
Yeah.
They're working.
A lot of them sit in the back on those white tables, which is fine. I'm just glad they're there.
listening and behaving.
And they largely do. I have little issues. Yeah.
Back when we were young, there wasn't too much else to do though.
That's the major problem. Yeah.
They got a lot of other things to do now.
Oh, yeah.
But one thing I talk to the youth about, though, is that all of those things they're mindless distractions. If you play a video game for 8 hours, you get to the end of that video game, you haven't done anything. You haven't accomplished anything. You don't feel good about it. Or if you watch a Netflix series for 10 hours in a row,
Oh,
you don't feel good about that. But if you spend time with somebody and get to know them and they get to know you and you have some fun together, that always matters.
Mhm.
You walk away with memories.
I was gonna say, that's what they'll remember.
Yes. And so,
that's like with Abby, coming to church here. It's not just me that she loves. She loves this church and she loves the people in here.
Mhm.
She never ceases to amaze me that she is that way. But like the other grandkids, they don't care.
For the-
Either one way or the other.
past couple of months, Jonathan was picking up. He has always, after church, for several months now, he would go to the cafe after church and buy $1. They have $1 cup or $1 cone of ice cream. Well, he decided to start taking kids who wanted to go with him. So every Sunday now, he's got like 6 or 7 kids that show up to church so they can get ice cream after church. He's spending $30 a month right now taking kids out to ice cream after church because he wants them to be there, and it's working.
Oh, bless him.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't mean to just brag on him, but it's what he picked up was what he told me was his dad is that you've always tried to we've always tried to have positive memories in church. We have a baptism, we go out for ice cream. Now, if there's a baptism, I have to take them out to eat because they're older now. But
ice cream doesn't just get it.
yeah, but I don't care. It's worth it because if their whole life they've associated positive memories with church, then breaking that tie becomes so much harder. But I know a lot of people who had negative memories in church and nobody made efforts to make the memories positive. And so for them, it's not a place of respite and release. It's more of anxiety and I don't want to be here, or it's just boring. And it's like, no. So that's why it's so important with kids to associate positive memories with church. And I've just been thrilled with him because now he's doing that for others. And it's like, well, I feel kind of proud. I did something right. So, but that's where the money should be spent.
It embarrasses me, though, that he has to get down there and wake them kids up half the time.
But you know what?
But I'm thankful he does.
He does it.
But it is kind of embarrassing to me that here's another child. I mean, he's a child.
He's going to make a good evangelist.
Yes.
It's just built into him, even more than it is me. And in fact, okay, let me tell you a story. Okay, if you're on air and you're listening to this, practice discretion. But a girl texted Jonathan pictures of herself naked,
Oh.
and he deleted them immediately and went and told his mother and me, and he blocked her number. It's a girl from school. And he's like, I didn't ask for this. I don't know why she thought I wanted to see this. And I said, well, son, it's quite simple. She wants you, but doesn't know how to get you. and she thinks that you want what a lot of other guys want. And that's not what you're looking for. So then he unblocked her and started sending her Bible verses. And then she said, well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you, but what do you like? And he's like, well, come to church. So maybe she'll come to church. But she lives an hour away, so I don't know if that'll really happen. But it's just, man, the more positive memories we put in kids about church, they'll figure out a lot of the details in time. Alex does a good job teaching them. They are learning here, but it's those positive feelings associated with church that bring them back.
Well, I would be careful that it wasn't somebody that was just trying to do something to insult or embarrass him.
Well, thankfully it wasn't.
It wasn't, okay, so
She's just, it's true. A lot of stupid boys, I've had to confront a handful of them, I think Alex has too, where they expect girls to send them nude pictures now. And they don't actually realize it's a crime. If you're under 18, it's child pornography. It's a crime to send it, and it's a crime to receive it. And we had one boy who was asking Harley for, they call them nudes, and we turned him in. We just flat out went straight to the police and turned him in. Because if he was doing that to Harley, he was going to do it to some other kid unless somebody scared him straight. And, thankfully, our local police force handles that with class.
they do respond then.
Yeah, they do respond, but they don't show up guns blazing and
No.
put them in handcuffs and shove them to the ground. In fact, one time, not for that reason, but for another reason, they showed up and they scared one of my children straight, which was just fine with me. And they're good. We've got mostly good police officers who really do try to give the youth a chance to straighten up. We're not going to do this again. If you do, these are the consequences, and here are the handcuffs, and there's a jail cell, and do you want to go there? Because that's your options. And then they, so, what a world we live in. That kids, things like that even happen to our kids like that. But, yeah.
So many things weren't available for even our kids or younger kids or older kids like us. I mean, there was plenty of things that you get in trouble with, but this type of thing was a lot less.
Oh, yeah.
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 My kids didn't have computers in school.
No,
Right. Yeah. In fact, when I was a kid, that's when the computers were just starting, and there was only like a handful in the whole school, and there was no internet. And basically, you learned how to type. It was basically an advanced typewriter. That's what I remember.
Well, when I was in typing, unless you were really good, you got the old manual ones. And I got short fingers, and I always blame that why I'm not a good typer. And only when you were really good that you were lucky, because they only had 2 or 3 in the class, and so the top students got the electric ones.
Ah,
That I was never a top student,
fancy. Yeah.
as if you couldn't tell.
We had an electric typewriter as a kid. And what was cool about the electric typewriter that a computer printer can't do is you can put anything in it and type on it. Well, as a kid, that's dangerous, because then you start grabbing things you shouldn't and put it in the typewriter and then inking it. Because, the letters had ink on them, and they would rest on the ink, and then they would, fire, literally. It was like a mechanical machine. And yeah. So my parents quickly learned that it was better for us to have a word processor than a typewriter. Yeah. All righty. Good times telling on myself. I don't know how we got there. That was quite a
Rabbit
hole,
Yeah.
rabbit trail. Yeah.
That was a rabbit.
We're good
dead.
at
That
that. We're
Well,
good rabbit hunters.
Yeah.
We don't get any rabbits, but
Don't get me wrong.
Just think that all started from getting up early.
yeah.
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 I want you all to know that these lessons never go as I intend.
I
Never.
wonder why.
Yeah. So, Alex, when you have your own day timers group on a weekly basis in the future, just remember that you can plan all you want, but it goes where it goes.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
As long as you
Have a
got
good
us old
time.
folks.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I just try to have the scriptures studied, and past that, it is what it is. All right. Well, all of that leads up to the fact that the disciples find him, and they say, everyone is looking for you. Now, depending on your personality type, that could be a bit of good news or some bad news. If you're more of an introvert, that probably sounds terrifying. If you're more of an extrovert, you're like, all right, let's do this. You know, talking about Nick earlier, Nick is the most extroverted person I've ever known.
He is.
He is the most extreme that way. Like, that guy never wants to be alone. Sometimes he would bug me so much that, you know, and I mean, I never had any problems with Nick. That's not my point. But like, I need 5% of my time alone just to regroup, basically. He doesn't need any time alone. So at like 1 o'clock in the morning, he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, Nick, I'm sleeping. Well, are you sure you want to? If he was up, somebody else had to be up with him. So anyway, but now here's the thing about Jesus. I think he was both. He could spend time alone, be perfectly content with himself and the Father, or he could be with people and be content. You know, I'm a little bit of both. I'm not perfectly both, of course. Only Jesus is. But quite a daunting thing after the day he had yesterday. Everyone is looking for you. My daughter recently went on a trip to see her grandmother by herself, 2 hours away, but you know she can drive, and she went, and she spent 4 days there, and she came back the night before she had to work, and she had to work at 4:30 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And she learned very quickly that sometimes you need some time between a vacation and your work. Like, you need a day home.
Mm-hmm.
You need that buffer. You know, most of us are nodding like, yeah, it's nice to have a day in between. Jesus didn't get that opportunity. You know, he had a hectic day, and now everybody's looking for him. And so here it begins again. So what does he say? Verse 38, very important verse.
Let's go somewhere else to a town nearby so that I can preach there also. For that is what I came for.
Okay, think about that. He's like, let us go to town to do what?
So we can preach there.
Preach. And why?
That's what he came for.
That's what he came for. That's something everybody needs to understand about Jesus. And I know that message is muddled so much in the world. One thing, I'm glad we have a food pantry, don't get me wrong, but one thing that annoys me about the way the food pantry is structured is that it's all about giving out bread and not the bread of life. There's virtually no effort whatsoever to recruit people to come to church or to share the gospel in any way, you know. And that's true for almost every food pantry. I'm not just picking on ours. But what was Jesus actually here for? To preach the gospel. You know, the casting out demons, the healing people, the feeding people, all of that was to just get people to hear the gospel message and respond to it. So if we never get there, we're not doing a whole lot of good, especially eternally speaking. Again, not against the food pantry. Glad people go and volunteer and all that, and I've done it too. But if a ministry, and a lot of liberal churches are this way, if they're set up to do nothing but help people hear and not get people ready for eternity, they're not doing much good. Not in the long run. And that's a sober truth. It's a tough truth, but it's one more people need to understand. Jesus himself in the red letter said, I'm here to preach.
Well, the food pantries say ministry, don't
Yeah.
they, on it?
That's it.
That's what, isn't it, wasn't it at one time sponsored by some of the churches?
Well, they are. I mean, a lot of the
That's what
churches
I
directly
read.
support them.
They do.
Churches bring donations.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what they do, it's the donations.
The emergency food pantry is sponsored by all the churches in Macon,
Yeah.
a bunch of the churches in Macon.
But you know, they don't even hand out cards telling people, you know, when service times are, or nothing. I mean, there's no effort whatsoever.
Come get your food, go.
Pretty much. Which you got to then ask yourself, is there any real difference between a secular food pantry and this one? Not that I can tell outside of the name. And so again, not against the fact that it exists and it helps people. Totally fine with that. But that's not a ministry.
No, that's what I was wondering. I guess you could call it, because they're doing something
Yeah.
for people, it's where they're.
You could call it
ministry.
charity. You could call it,
Yeah.
you know, and that's all fine. Is it a ministry? I'm not convinced of that.
I don't know that either.
I'm not. You
No,
know,
because they're not teaching anybody anything. Or
no. You know, and again, the Bible actually warns against only giving people bread and not the bread of life, because in eternity, that ain't gonna matter. You know, it's short-sighted thinking. So
I had a friend when he was in the fertilizer and chemical business. That was an African man nice young fellow. He was a salesman for, I can't remember what chemical company it was, but he told Ron, we talked a lot about his homeland. And he said, you know, you people here in the United States are wonderful people. You send us food, you bring us food, but don't do that. You shouldn't be doing that. He said, go over there and teach them how to farm and how to raise their own food and animals and such. He said, this just handing out and not.
You know what's kind of funny about that? You mentioned that. I've had many people tell me the same thing. Missionaries, people from foreign
Mm-hmm.
countries. And you know what it is? You know why it's set up that way? Because it's set up to benefit the givers and not the receivers. It makes people feel good they're doing something, but they don't have to consider the consequences of what they're doing. Because, again, in fact, if you look at Jesus, when he fed people, he fed the 5,000, right, and the 4,000. And guess what? That was it. Stop there. And in fact, after he fed the 5,000, he preached a sermon that was so tough, everybody left. And remember, he went to the disciples and said, will you leave me too? Imagine having a church of 5,000 and the preacher gives up and gives such a sermon that 4,990 people leave. That was Jesus. So he was serious about the preaching. And so when I see organizations that call themselves ministries, but they don't preach, I got a problem with it. I really do. And I don't have a problem in private, individually. I don't make public statements about it because that wouldn't go over well. But I do privately tell people, you should really reconsider that because it's not biblical. It just isn't. The Bible says faith comes by hearing. If you don't ever teach, just like you said, if you don't teach, you don't preach, people don't in the end learn anything. Imagine if all you did with your kids was feed them, but you never taught them anything. All you're doing is raising up bodies. And I have a feeling a lot of charity is just raising up bodies. We're just sustaining people until death. I don't know.
Well, go into Macon sometime when you all know what you see there a lot of times. And they come back week after week after week, or month,
That's one reason why I encourage people on an individual basis to help out there, but I'll never have the church, I'll never get behind the church supporting it. Nobody's ever really proposed it. But a lot of churches do directly support the Macon County Ministries. But I don't think that's right because it's against the way the Bible says we should be doing this. It's not a ministry if we're not preaching. It's that simple.
If we do it as the church as a ministry, aren't we in a way backing up the other denominations
Right.
such as that, just by being in the same thing together?
Especially if they were, okay, you know what would actually be worse than not preaching at all? Preaching a wrong gospel, like faith only. So, and I'm sure that's why they don't do that, but then why did they call it a ministry? They're faking Christianity in a way. Again, I don't think it's intentional. I don't think there's any bad, intentions.
No.
But sometimes good intentions pave the road to hell. And I'm afraid that a lot of this modern way of doing charity is doing just that. It's paving a golden road to hell. It's giving people a free pass to just go walking right into the wide gates. And I don't want to stand in front of Jesus one day and be like, well, I gave people bread, but never the bread of life.
Our Salvation Army, you go for that for dinner, you listen to the preacher.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing, that's the way it should be done. And you know what? I'd give people filet mignon if they would listen to a good gospel sermon.
Deal. Come over tonight.
Yeah, we'll be over for
Yeah.
supper.
Deal.
We all three
Real
go.
listen. Yeah, we'll all be there.
Only people not immersed. So
Yeah.
sorry, you're all dismissed. Yeah. But the point is that, we can't forget what Jesus says here. And he does that. From time to time in the Gospels, he says something that is really unpopular, even to this day. And people don't want to hear it. That when he fed the 5,000, you bet everybody's stomachs were full thinking, man, we like this guy. He heals us. He feeds us. And then his sermon basically just condemns them all. Like, I know why you're here.
I think of Mr. Reese on stories like that because he's gone to multiple churches and a lot of them have died under his preaching. And he's always said because people don't want to hear the truth.
He told me last time I fixed his computer about a year ago, He said, "I've had to come to realize in my old age that every church I preached at closed." And he said, "I have mixed feelings about that." He said, "I always preach the truth. Sometimes I wonder if I did it in the way I should have." You know, to hear a great man like that question himself at all, I didn't have any opinion, of course. You don't to somebody like that. But that's exactly how Jesus was. I mean, think about it. Jesus preached in such a way that by the end of his ministry, the people were crying, "Crucify him." He was no televangelist. That's for sure.
Well, I have a question back a little bit when you were talking about the demons,
Okay.
where he was
Yeah.
taking up the demons. I have a belief that there are demons still on earth.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, that's what and I've been through some sessions with some of these that's been involved in that years ago, and they said you do not want to have anything
No.
to do with it, that you think might in any way be connected to it.
Yeah, I think the healthy modern perspective on that is they're still around, but Satan uses them very differently than he did in the Gospels. You know, and also they serve a different purpose. In the Gospels, he was trying to expose Jesus. He was trying to kill Jesus. Well, Jesus succeeded in his mission. And that's why you see the demons fade out pretty quick after that, because they were kind of a last-ditch effort by Satan to get rid of Jesus. And when that didn't work, well, they weren't much good anymore. So instead now I think he uses it in more third world country situations where people have no access or very little access to the gospel. He uses them for the severe mentally ill. He goes after people who are very, perceptible or evil. The modern satanic movement is a very strange movement because it's half satanic, half atheist, and people don't understand that. There was recently an article on a liberal news website called the Huffington Post where they were celebrating a lady joining the Satanic Church so they could oppose the evangelical Christians voting conservatively.
Well, my mind is thinking that is there demons involved? I know that they're not all of it, but in like all the rioting and burning of things and things that were done this year earlier. I mean, not saying they're not doing things now, but it was so vicious there for a while.
Sure.
Sure hope so. Hate to think humans are capable of all that.
Well,
That's,
to me,
You know,
that
it's
was horrible.
A
to
good way of
watch.
maybe thinking about it is God only goes where he's invited. You ever think about that? God's never forced himself on anyone. You know, when Jesus was preaching, when the apostles were preaching, it was up to every person to respond on their own. He never went where he wasn't invited. Satan is always where he's not invited. You know, so if he can stick something in somewhere, like a riot or extreme violence, and you don't even have to go just to riots. I mean, think about all the domestic abuse and violence, especially since the lockdown, the number of kids that have been under extreme duress. You know, there was this horrible news story I read the other day where this girl was being taken care of by her mother's boyfriend while she was at work. And this girl was on Zoom for school because the school was doing everything virtually. And he came home, didn't realize the laptop was on, and raped her right in front of the camera. And the teacher had everybody log off and called the police. And I mean, to some degree, it was horrible to witness, but at the same time, she was so grateful she caught it because this little girl's been underneath this probably every day for God knows how long, you know? So to imagine there's not demons involved in that, because, Satan's always where he's not invited. I mean, Satan's at church every Sunday. But God doesn't go to a church that isn't preaching his gospel. Why would he? You know? And so that's also why you see demons possessing people and not angels. You ever notice that? Angels never possess anybody because they're under God's command. He doesn't go where he's not invited. But demons are always going where they're not invited.
Well, God gives us freedom of choice.
Yep.
Satan doesn't give us
Nope.
freedom of choice. There's a difference.
Which is also why you can, being kind of bold here, but if a secular view is for freedom, good chance God created that secular idea, like liberty in politics. That's a good thing, freedom of choice. But if it's a system that denies choice, that's not godly. There's no way that could be godly. In fact, God seems to honor choice very highly because if he's willing to let somebody he loves choose to go to hell, he must value choice very highly. Because he does. There's not In fact, Jonathan and I were having this discussion about heaven and hell recently because it's a very hard thing to accept. It's a very easy thing to accept that there's an eternal heaven, but it's a very hard thing to accept there's an eternal hell. I get that. It's emotionally very difficult to accept. And one way I put it to him is, son, I want you to know something. Nobody's going to be in hell who didn't choose to be. That's very important to realize. God, it's not like God created someone and then gave them no opportunity. Of course he has. Maybe we don't know how. But there's stories in the Old Testament and the New Testament where for somebody to hear what they needed to hear at the time, God literally transported somebody there to tell them. There's a famous story in Book of Acts, chapter 8, where Philip, God literally just transports him to Azotus, 20 miles away, instantaneously. I mean, that's what God does. He gives everybody an opportunity to respond. He is fair. He is just. So I don't buy it. I never have bought it that there's these tribes who have never heard and die and go to hell because they've never heard. I don't buy that. God has always found a way. And so I don't know how he does it. I don't need to know. But I know my God, and he's not unfair. If faith comes by hearing, then they heard somehow. Somehow. However it is. And I accept that by faith. Now, that doesn't mean we don't sin. That doesn't mean we don't go. But I know that he isn't unfair like that.
I also think we need to hear more. Used to definitely at revivals, you would have more hell and damnation sermons.
Mhm.
And too much, I think, used to. But I think we don't hear enough of scaring people, not just to scare them, but to realize that it is very serious when they're
Yeah.
turning their back on God.
Right.
They don't
Yeah.
believe that.
Yeah.
They think he's a loving God. Why would he not take me even?
That's one thing I like about how Chris always ends the service. Have you noticed where he
Mhm.
always
I
tells
think
people?
that's good.
Yeah, I thought it's perfect. It's awesome because it always reminds people there's not eternity to choose here. Remember Jane Roberts' poem, Plenty of Time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh man, every few years I read that at the end of a sermon because people need to understand that you don't know when you're going to be out of time.
And it looks like it's getting closer and closer.
Yeah,
Whether it's
So-
because I'm getting old, but I think for everybody it's getting
Yeah.
closer.
it's
And
something.
I'm not criticizing
No,
you. I
it's
don't
fine.
mean that. I didn't
No,
mean
I
it
don't
that
care.
way. But I do remember thinking, gosh, that's all we hear when you'd have a revival or something. But a certain amount of that, I think, sometimes is needed to scare people to a certain point,
Yeah.
or to make them realize. Yeah, wake
Make
them
'em
up.
think.
And they've got to be wakened.
Yeah,
That there's a reason they've got to make a decision.
it's funny you mention
Talking
it.
about hell and brimstone.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, we went to a Pentecostal church when I was a kid. And I felt like, and I didn't understand really what I was hearing most of the time, but I mean, I felt like it was now what I understand to be hellfire and brimstone. That's what they call it.
Mhm.
Every Sunday. I remember one Sunday, the preacher talked about how being in hell was like being in an oven and the door would never open. And as a little child, that scared the living tar out of me.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, no,
So when I'm in an audience with a bunch of kids, I got to be careful how I go there because
yeah, but
it was like traumatic. In fact, what it did to me is that as a teenager, I just rejected it outright because until about from ages I'd say about 12 to 17, I didn't want anything to do with a God who put people in an oven and never opened the door. That's how I viewed it. And so you can go too far with that, like you said, So it's a tough thing to get right. If you have like sometimes in Sunday school class, I go a little deeper into things like that. Or on a Wednesday night, one time I taught nothing. The whole lesson was on hell. I've got a whole sheet I developed on nothing but hell. But quite frankly, after an hour of that, that's rough. Now I know some people have the ability to deal with that more than others, but I'm an optimist, so an hour of hell is enough for me. Good night.
well, and it's not something that you ought to do a series on.
No.
But and maybe it's for specific crowds or something.
Yes. That's how I do it
can
now.
understand that, but I do think that it's something that's kind of just we walk around it a little bit too much.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I'm always trying to walk, and we do this in the youth group too. We try to walk a fine line between scaring somebody and turning them off.
Yeah.
'Cause that's what happened to me. I was angry at God and at my parents. I mean, I was a bad teenager, and one of the reasons why is because I was so upset that if God was real and was that way, I didn't want anything to do with him. And if he wasn't real, then people are making up scary stories to scare kids. So it's a tough thing. It is. I get that. And then we went to a church where for a while you never heard anything but positive and happiness, and that was shallow, So it is that careful balance. That's why I like Chris ending the sermon every service that way. That's a really good way to do it. He came up with that on his own.
I've never heard that until he said that, but I do think that's a good way to end it
It
for a
is.
sermon. I think he does.
Does a good job. Well, we only covered 4 verses today.
But
So-
we covered a lot of territory.
We did.
No
We did.
immediatelys.
Yeah, there was not a single immediately in this story.
Next.
Don't worry,
next
it's
on there is
coming. Yeah.
42.
42 is the next immediately. Yeah, it's coming. Yeah, that's Mark is the immediately book. All right, 10 minutes after. Boy, I'm sorry. I know Sunday went longer than I
We
wanted
didn't
to.
get started until late.
That's okay. I promise next Sunday will be more normal length. I didn't realize I went over so much. All right. Well, let's. Virgil, would you close us with prayer?
Our gracious Heavenly Father, we're thankful to be here today. We're thankful for your word. We're thankful for Jesus that he came. And Father, we depart this place. We just ask you to go with us, guide and direct us, and use it. Forgive us for our sin. We ask these things in Jesus' name. For his sake. Amen.
Amen. All right. Everybody say bye.
Bye.
Bye.